It's mine. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Positive Fandom. Um, I am your host, RM, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Today, I have with me Darth Plato. Darth Plato, how are you today?
I'm fine. I'm having a great morning. Thank you for asking. And how are you this morning?
I am doing well, and I'm excited to be doing episode 5 of the Horatio Hornblower series that we've been covering. Oh, hold on one second. I'll be. Oh man, just hold on. Hold the fort, Darth Plato.
Hey, good morning, chat. I think we're going to talk about episode 5 of Mutiny, the fifth episode of the Hornblower series. It's RM's favorite episode,
Hey,
I think.
Darth Plato, I'm sorry. I'm waiting for a phone call from the doctor for my mother. So I know that they're going to be calling soon, but the person who's calling, hello.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I hung up. I'm sorry. I don't have time for your call. So sorry, sir. It was a telemarketer. I'm waiting for the doctor to call. He's supposed to call. So guys, if I have to leave, like I think I did that once before, Darth Plato, where my mother's doctor called. Guys, I'm so excited for today's episode because it is Horatio Hornblower episode 5, the mutiny episode. And as I was telling you, Darth Plato, a few minutes before, I am so excited for this. I love this mutiny episode. I think it's one of the best mutiny episodes I've ever seen. And, everybody, when you think about mutiny, people, see a lot of different stories. There's mutiny on the bounty and in a number of different shows. But this one, it's just so good, Darth Plato. Of course, it starts where we see, Horatio in a cell in the Caribbean, and Captain Pelew goes and speaks to him and saying, how did you end up here? Like what's the story? And of course, it's told in a flashback. But to be honest with you, Darth Plato, I really like what they did with this episode. I think the chaos that ensues on the ship is so much fun to watch. And it starts off very typical, where Horatio is of course the officer on duty, or on watch, and one of his men kind of go against orders, or he says, hey, it's too dangerous for them to be out on the sails, let me take them down from there. And the captain does not like those orders. So honestly, Darth Plato, I'm not surprised that the captain would be happy that anybody disobeyed his orders. I mean, was that even common to do that? It's not like they were disobeying the orders because they thought the captain was wrong. They have to change to, the conditions out there. What did you think about that, and how the captain handled it initially towards Horatio, who really was not happy with what the captain said?
Well, strictly speaking, in those days, the captain's word was law, and it's unfortunate that the captain
I
asked you to
can't
do
hear
something.
you. Is your speaker on?
It is on.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's unfortunate that the fact of the matter is that in those days the captain of the ship, the word was law. So if the captain asked you to do something dangerous, you were going to have to do it. You just have to hope that the captain was rational. There wasn't a whole lot you could really do. I mean, there was precedent for mutiny in those days, but it wasn't very common. It's not as common as we might imagine. And in those days, you really had to, unless you downright got a pistol and shot your CO, there really was no way to get fired.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea that any group of officers would feel confident enough to take action against the captain is a bit of a surprise. But I also think it's very interesting too, because these officers who seem to get along well. They're like they're a really good bunch of officers on the ship. Feel quite confused by this captain, who,
Yeah.
of course, in the story is incredibly well decorated, has a stellar background. But we also noticed some very interesting behaviors and patterns in this episode. In particular, the doctor, who apparently is very faithful to the captain. And I'm not surprised by this. We saw in Master and Commander how the doctor on the ship was a very important person. Certainly, they would be close to the captain, but would it have gone to this extreme where he's essentially sedating the captain? It seems like all the time. What did you think about that?
No, I didn't think that that was common thing at all. Honestly, I think they could have. I think that honestly, it's just something they put into the plot. I don't think it's actually based on something that really happened. There are elements of this episode that are based on real events. Believe it or not, this is actually based on a true story. However, that aspect of the doctor covering for the captain and drugging him and then trying to stick up for him all the way to the end, that part I think it's just contrived for the plot.
Yeah, I think it does come across a little wonky, but at the same time, it does look really good on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
As the captain is sort of like in this dire straight situation, and the doctor is covering for him, and even the doctor suddenly finds himself towards the end of the story, quite under the gun, if you will, having to respond as to what's going on, but
Yeah.
certainly, it seems like Horatio has an impossible situation against him because why would anyone believe Horatio or even the other officers over the captain? And of course, in the next episode, they do kind of address that. But this whole thing of injustice versus discipline, which I think it's always depending upon the point of view. But to be honest with you, the captain has the final word on the ship,
Oh
and
yeah.
even with all of those people in his command, including the officers and the shipmen, it's very interesting to see how this plays out. The actor who plays the captain does do a very good job of kind of dispensing justice, if you will, towards the ship. The men get punished. Horatio has to stay up for 36 hours. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh man, this is just horrible. But the captain also kind of focuses on one of the other young officers. I think he's an officer or a
Yeah.
midshipman. And
As a midshipman.
yeah, Llewellyn, who's just a kid, he's probably he looks like he's about 12 or 13. He looks really young, and he can't fight back in any way. He just has to kind of take it and become sort of like a whipping boy for the captain, who starts to become somewhat paranoid about the entire crew or even the officers conspiring against him. I think it's kind of interesting that he was so panicky about this. Do you think this character, this captain, has found himself in this situation before, and that's why he's so paranoid about a conspiracy, a mutiny against him?
Honestly, no, I don't. I think it's just again, I think it's something that they put into the story to sort of drive the action in a certain way. And I think that's really what they're trying to do because, like I said, this is based on a real event, and the aspect of the mental illness of the captain and the paranoia of the captain, I think, is the added element. The Well, let me just say that the story that we're watching is based in 1802, so we jumped ahead from the previous episode by at least 5 to 7 years. So Mr. Hornblower is now a third lieutenant. He's, I think yeah. So there's two other men above him. In the beginning of the episode, they show another officer coming on board, Mr. Bush. As you may or may not have recognized, Mr. Bush was also the actor who played Doctor Who in the TV movie, the Eighth Doctor.
Exactly.
And Pelu is now a Commodore. Hornblower is not on Pelu's ship anymore. He, as for the captain himself, flogging was not something that was regularly done in the Navy. I'm only aware of really one instance where that did happen. I could be wrong about this, but there was a ship called the HMS Hermione that was commanded by a man named Hugh Piggott. And Hugh Piggott is the inspiration not just for the captain of this episode, but also for the characterization of Captain Bligh and the Bounty. So the drama that you see in this episode, the extreme actions of the captain, the almost irrational, tyrannical behavior is actually based on real events. These events that you see really did happen.
Well, that's good to know. And I think that in regards to showing the relationships on the ship, which of course this whole series is pretty much a lot about, they do such a good job here. Oftentimes we'll see a situation where the captain is accusing, as I said, Horatio and maybe even some of the other officers of treason. But I also think it's very interesting how the officers responded to Horatio, who was clearly hurt. I mean, he was hurt. His I'm not going to say his pride, but was hurt. But to be honest with you, it seemed like he felt his authority was being questioned as to whether or not the captain trusted him. So, that part was hurt. And of course, any officer would be upset when your commanding officer is telling you that, you messed up or the call you made was bad. So I can understand Horatio being upset by this, especially since someone died in the action, or at least in
Yeah,
whatever it was that was
yeah,
happening during that storm.
yeah.
So
What happened on the Hermione was actually worse because that same episode that you saw depicted where the man fell to his death, that really did happen on Hugh Pickett's ship. Except in this case, three men died. So this is actually almost a watered down version of what really happened. And so the three men fell to their death, and he just kind of comes onto the scene and goes, "What's this?" Throw the ladies overboard. And that was also an aspect that you saw in Hornblower episode. The guy didn't just fall to his death. It was the manner in which the captain just kind of dismisses it and just says throw them overboard. And Hornblower really didn't like that. Nothing about that.
exactly. And so, it is very interesting to see these officers trying to console Horatio, saying, "Hey, Horatio's like, the guy was only doing his duty," and the other officers are kind of like, do what you have to do to get by and everything.
Mm.
How often do you think we would see a situation where these officers would be supporting Horatio, knowing how upset he was after what happened?
I'm inclined to say they wouldn't have been, honestly, because in those days it really was the case that the captain's word was law, and if your career meant anything to you, you were not going to buck the captain. So
Yeah.
that's just that simple. To illustrate that point, let me elaborate further on the Hugh Pickett story. In the case of the Hermione and Hugh Pickett, the officers supported him 100%, regardless of what he did in these rather extreme examples of treatment of other people, not just the men on the ship, the non-officers, but even people that visited the ship. The there was an instance where the ship collided with an American merchant ship, and so he invited the American captain to come on board. And as soon as the American captain came on board, Captain Pickett had him seized and put onto a captain's mast, and then had him flogged, had him scourged right there. A serving captain from another navy had just had him scourged right there on the spot. And this caused a rather bizarre diplomatic incident, and Captain Pickett had to go before a board of inquiry to answer for what happened here. And interestingly enough, the one of the officers that headed that board of inquiry was the real Captain Bligh.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Certainly, a really cool piece of trivia there.
Mm.
And the other kind of interesting thing about all of this is that um, once the captain seems to kind of be taking liberties with who he's accusing of treason, he goes kind of extreme with warning the officers and crew with it, meaning that he decides that he's going to let everybody know what the punishment is if they cross him, if they don't follow his directions. And a lot of times it's, if you don't do this, everybody will be punished. And then he kind of oddly rewards the crew with more alcohol, just sort of off the cuff. It is very interesting, but I think that even at that point, some of the officers are wondering, why is the captain doing this? Why is the captain rewarding the crew constantly with alcohol when, I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but the timing of it is very funny. Is it so that they support him even though he knows the officers might have doubts?
Yeah, I think in this case is I'm not sure why he was giving distributing the alcohol like that. It's the exact reverse of what Mr. Pickett did in his situation, where the officers were with him, but the men weren't. So it's, in this case, it's almost like it's turned around. It's like he'd bend over backwards to appease the men and terrorizing the officers. So they kind of inverted that for some reason. But as far as giving the alcohol to the men goes, I think in this case, the point for the plot is that the excessiveness caused the men to be less effective in combat, and you saw that when they had the closing encounter with the French ships.
Yeah, absolutely. Horatio tries to warn him these two frigates are coming. At least I think that's the one. And the captain is like, he won't hear it. And, they only have just mere minutes to respond. You can clearly see the frigate so close. And then the captain's like, beat to quarters. And it's kind of like, oh, gee, you guys are already wasted maybe 10, 15 minutes here. The captain even goes so far as to stop the men from communicating during an action, which I thought was incredibly extreme. For him wanting to control things to such a point where it almost cripples the crew. And so incidentally, Horatio ends up firing a cannon, but the full shot is not prepared, I guess. And he goes ahead and fires anyway, and it's effective for what they needed as sort of like a warning shot, I guess. At least that's how I would put it. But the captain is still very upset with Horatio, kind of accusing him of, not using the
Yeah.
equipment properly or whatever you want to call it. He's upset, even though Horatio kind of, saved the day or kind of protected the ship using limited resources, just only because he didn't have the shot set up properly. And the captain ends up pretty much whipping Llewellyn
Yeah.
again. Um, it's really kind of hard to watch some of it because it
Yeah.
seems like no matter what Llewellyn does, he's going to be the victim. He's still very young, very small, and the captain just really he does kind of, uh, as I said, threaten death and tell them about what they can be charged with. Um, is the rest of the crew even taking any of this stuff seriously? Because I'm sure they're called to go on, above deck and kind of listen to what the captain and the officers have to say in commands. But are they even aware of what's going on the officer level? Like the
Oh, they would be. They would be aware because how can you not be? I mean, everything's happening within earshot. So they certainly would have had to have known. And also, you notice that there was a compartmentalization amongst the men also, because you saw the instance where what was his name, the big fella had a confrontation with one of the other men on the ship who was also a big guy. That also was an angle that played out.
Exactly. And there is also some sort of conflict or encouragement of fighting below decks, if you will. When I say below decks, I mean the sailors. And I even find that a little confusing because they it seems like this particular group of officers, they're not entirely completely out of control of the crew, but it seems like they do have a little um being in charge or giving orders problem with some of the crew members.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that was stuff that happened, but now we find it, kind of more exaggerated with the pressures from the captain, but also, having the soldiers even more drunk than usual, I'm guessing, since that's what they drank anyway. But it is causing problems. Um, and we kind of find a situation where Horatio, who's still being punished because he's been told to stay up for 36 hours and be on watch and lookout. Um, he starts to talk to another senior officer about whether or not the captain is fit for duty. And honestly, I think I can't remember whether or not. Well, what's interesting about this is that that's a serious accusation, and of course, this is what this entire episode is about: mutiny. And as I told you, Darth Plato, I love the chaos that ensues on the ship. I absolutely relish in this episode because of the crazy machinations and everything that the officers have to do, as well as the sailors. God bless them for having to go ahead and handle this. But what's also very interesting is that Horatio finds out he's not the only one, or at least he's suspected he's not the only officer that shares this sentiment. And I think that that also makes him feel a little bit better. But in all honesty, Darth Plato, that ensues something else that is very uncomfortable in a ship when you're a commander or someone who gives orders. And that is that now that you know the other people who are in charge feel the same way you do and aren't doing anything, it makes it very uncomfortable. Do you stick up for your fellow officer? Like what happens? It is very interesting to see when and where these officers decide they're going to speak up and why and how, whether they think it's even going to be effective, knowing very well how the captain here, whose the picture is here, may or may not respond. Um, so Horatio, poor Horatio, is exhausted. He's been up for 36 hours and he's asleep on watch. It's probably the middle of the night. But the captain suddenly finds him. The captain is like in his night clothes, Darth Plato,
Yeah,
uh,
he's losing his mind. Yeah.
walking around on the ship, clearly kind of woken out of a stupor and just roaming the ship. The captains don't walk around ships like this. They wear their uniforms, they put their jacket on and their hat, even in the middle of the night. So this was very odd. It was almost like he escaped. The way I looked at it is like it's almost like he escaped from some kind of institution. He broke free and he's walking around the grounds, and the orderlies have to come and get him. Was that what they were trying to convey in this scene, you think?
Quite possibly. It certainly was very effective because that's exactly what was wrong with him. He's losing his mind in this instance. Also, they didn't have mental institutions in those days, but your point is taken. The captain, by the way, the actor that played this captain, I don't recall his name, but he's been in a lot of movies. I think he was in Titanic as well.
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
He's a very well-known actor. I think he did pass away. I think he
yeah.
died at the age of 80, but I don't remember the age he was, excuse me, the date that he passed away. But he did die, and he was in his 80s. So he's had a
Yeah.
very long career and
Long.
is well known for certain in the entertainment industry. Um, but also, it's at this point that it may not be at this exact point. Let's just say sometime in the story afterwards, Horatio learns that the doctor uh, has been giving the captain something to help him with his sleeping,
Mhm.
some kind of supplement. We don't know yet what it is exactly,
I
but
don't know.
it's not a surprise because this captain seems like he's under a little bit of stress. He has a little bit of uncertainty. And Clive, who's the doctor, as I mentioned, who's been with him for quite some time, we learned during this episode that they've been together for quite a few years,
Yeah.
is perfectly feels perfectly justified in stating that he gets a supplement. The captain is gets a supplement from the doctor to sleep pretty much regularly. Was that anything unusual at the time, Darth
Oh,
Plato?
yeah, honestly wouldn't know what the business practices of Navy doctors were at the time. I admit, but it does as the viewer watching the audience, it does make us kind of scratch our heads and say, well, "Wait, this guy just empowering the captain even more is making the situation even worse." It's like you should be putting him down, not trying to rouse him more. Um, Also, another indication that the captain's losing his mind was there was a point in the episode where he made reference to King George II, and King George II had died in 1760, so he doesn't really know he doesn't even know who the king is. It would be like going onto a ship and having someone ranting about oh, Nixon's still president. Like, whoa, this guy, this guy doesn't know what year he's in.
Yeah, he certainly has lost some of his faculties. And, I think that there's also at this point in the story that the soldiers below decks are also dealing with chaos.
Mm.
And part of the chaos and disorder, as I told you, which I love, isn't just in the notion of the officers whose abilities to lead and command are being thwarted, right or left, more or less. But it also deals with the idea that we hear early in the episode that the captain likes the sailors to brawl with one another. I'm just so shocked by that kind of comment. Like that sounds that if you allow them to brawl, you're encouraging fighting. And there's no reason to encourage that. It's different if there's a boxing match somewhere or there's a wager, but this was essentially, let's go ahead and let the sailors beat up each other whenever they want to.
Yeah, yeah. It balkanizes the crew. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's so unrealistic and just really actually very dangerous because the sailors are getting injured for no reason. And I do
Also,
like how they showed it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's even worse when they go into battle. Toward the end of the movie, when they actually arrive at Santo Domingo. Um, that's another thing I wanted to mention is I don't know if this was when the captain is talking about what their mission was. They're going to go towards Santo Domingo. I don't know if it's an oversight by the writers of the episode or if it was just part of the captain not knowing what's going on, part of his mental decline. But at that time, Santo Domingo was actually under French control, not Spanish control. In 1795, Santo Domingo had been ceded to France, and that lasted for a period of about 15 years. So they wouldn't have been fighting the Spanish anyway. They would have been fighting the French. And at that time, there was a revolution going on. This is the famous revolution of Haiti, because it wasn't called Haiti in those days, but that we are talking about the island of Haiti. And Toussaint Overture, that was the days when he was running around there and causing that whole situation. And well, that's a whole story into itself. Not to get into that, but the reason why they're going to Santo Domingo is because of that situation. Because you have the slave rebellion going on, running all over the island. It wasn't because they were there carrying the war to the Spanish. Technically, they were at war with Spain at the time. That's true. That was still going on. But yeah, so like I said, I don't know if it was an oversight by the screenwriters or if this is just another evidence that Catherine was losing his mind.
Yes, and of course it's Hispaniola, where present day Haiti and Dominican Republic.
Right. So the eastern half of the island, I believe, was called San Domingo, and the eastern part was the Spanish controlled part called Santo Domingo. So today it's called Haiti on the one side and the Dominican Republic on the other. I think that's how it's called.
Exactly, but the island is called Hispaniola.
Right,
So,
right.
and there's two separate countries on the same island, as we just said. And this is one of the captains here, who is also involved in this whole thing. And it is very interesting because at some point, and this is kind of like kind of, as far as I'm concerned, very interesting. A lot of the disputes that we're seeing are the group of sailors that Horatio's in charge of. And the captain does make a point of saying, well, or at least implying that Horatio doesn't have his sailors in check or knows how to handle them. But it is very interesting because they get into this even bigger brawl below deck. And as they're below deck, Horatio and ends up kind of intervening, wanting to put the sailor into irons. But
Mhm.
when it's presented to the captain as a problem, which should have just
Right.
sort of been a regular dispute, and he should have believed that Horatio was, true to his word that this soldier was getting bullied or beat up or whatever. The captain says, "Well, you have a tendency to exaggerate, Hornblower, and I don't believe that this guy belongs to be in irons." He kind of dismisses the claim. I think at that point it's very interesting because now we have a situation where the captain is kind of not only disregarding, what could be a serious situation on board, um,
Right.
but he's also disregarding the welfare of the sailors themselves.
Well,
So,
that's yes, and that was really the problem with the incident with Hugh Piggott on the Hermione is his treatment of the men themselves was so bad that the men themselves actually overthrew the officers and they murdered all the officers and they murdered Hugh Piggott. And that really was what happened in that situation. In this situation, uh, the men seem to be really torn about who to support because the officers themselves are torn. So if the officers are not united in what's going on, then why should the men be? And the fact that the captain is sandbagging Horatio in this way is really indicative of just just how much the captain is really losing his faculties. Because if you're going to diminish your officer like this, you can't expect him to be effective in other situations, such as a combat situation. They're just it's the worst thing you could possibly do. You either support your man or you don't. If you don't support him, then you put him off the ship. There's some way. Just there's something that's really not the. It really is indicative that the captain really is losing his faculties. It's just the exact opposite of what you want to do as a captain.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is very interesting because it's at this point that the officers. So this was the turning point. Maybe not the entire turning point of the story, but at least visually, from where we're looking at the production, where the officers kind of meet and they're like, "Screw this, we got to talk about the captain. This is getting too serious. We can't take and have the captain behaving like this. We're going to have to do something." And it's very interesting. I really like this part as well, Darth Plato, because um, you know, uh, you know, there's this situation where they all are not supposed to meet in this fashion, and it's kind of done in the cloak of night. And one of the other officers or soldiers, sorry, sailors, is very aware of what's going on, and it's kind of putting morale is pretty much low, although it's not necessarily spoken out loud because everybody's afraid to talk. Like these sailors are afraid to come forward and say anything. I think Horatio speaks to one of his sailors who's under his command, and he confides in Horatio very calmly and honestly about, this is a bad situation. This is a bad situation, Horatio. We're in a bad situation. This is a bad way. And it's like, well, how do these officers, how's everybody going to handle this? Because it's not just the officers anymore, it's the sailors now, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of dynamics in this. You have the doctor who is a factor, Mr. Butler, who's also a factor. There's a number of different variables on the ship to deal with here. So at some point, the captain, after this whole accusation that Horatio brought this other sailor up on charges, it gets dismissed, and then the captain is really pissed off for some reason, and sort of like it makes even harsher watch demands on Horatio. He's got to still stay on deck for 36 hours, and the bells have to be rung every hour, and all sorts of crazy stuff. At some point, Mr. Butler also goes to the ship's doctor. I hope I'm saying the right guy, and asks if he thinks this is a legitimate situation. Doctor, is the captain fit for duty? And it is very interesting because the doctor says, well, this is a conflict of interest. If I say he's not fit for duty, you become captain and therefore you can't say anything. Would it matter? I mean, there's only so many officers on the ship. Would it matter if you were next in line and you said that the captain isn't fit and then you become captain? Should it matter? I mean, I did like the way it sounded, but it had come to such a breaking point, Darth Plato, on screen, from what we could see from the way it was presented. It almost felt like it didn't matter, and that wouldn't have convinced Mr. Butler. But of course, we learned later on why he didn't say the captain was unfit, and I'm going to talk about that. But
it was a silly thing to say, honestly. It was a silly thing to say because whatever officer goes to the doctor and say this man needs to be relieved, each man below is going to get one step closer to the top. So it doesn't matter if it's coming from the first lieutenant or the second lieutenant or the third lieutenant. Everybody's getting a promotion at that point, really. So yeah, everybody there has some sort of something to gain, so to speak. What difference does it make if they have something to gain or not? The captain's either sound or he's not. It's a very man. It's a very simple thing. He's either sound or he isn't. And the doctor went way too long before finally making a decision. Now you see the battle taking place. You just had it up there. The battle that was taking place. Now in the battle taking place, the captain wasn't anywhere to be seen because he was incapacitated. If you have a battle going on, the men are going to rally around whoever it is making the decisions. Now, the first lieutenant in the story clearly is not a man worthy of combat. That is a thing even to this day. There are officers in the military who are not well suited for a situation like this, and and I think this is one of those times. And the men are going to flock to who's making the decision. Now, Horatio is the one who has the wherewithal, and he has up until now, we've always seen Horatio jumping to action and taking the lead, using his faculties to get them well through all these situations. He has good tactical judgment. This is one of the situations. The men recognize that, and they're following anyway. They don't say, "Well, the captain doesn't trust you. Why don't I?" You don't really see that. When you're under fire, your thinking is completely different. We're under fire. We got to get out of this. We got to get out of this now. And this guy's making a decision. The captain nowhere to be seen, so they're going to follow Horatio, and that's why they're following Horatio in this instance. Now, as far as the battle itself, now something like that really did happen, where again we're going back to Hugh Piggott, when Hugh Piggott's ship went to the went to yeah, this is another reason why I say that this episode is based on a real story, because in the case of the Hermione and Hugh Piggott's ship, they also were on a mission to Hispaniola and Santo Domingo. It's exactly the same mission, and also in that exact same mission, the ship was not able to fire on the fortifications that were above a certain level. They ran aground, and they had to use this tactic that you see in the episode where they got out in their rowboat and they were trying to use the anchor to pull the ship off the rock. No, that really did happen. It wasn't just something they put in the episode.
And it is very interesting, Darth Plato, to see what the repercussions are as a result of what this captain has done. Because as we were both saying, now they are actually at a point where they are plotting mutiny. Yeah. and essentially what they need is for the doctor to say that the captain is unfit. And what they're up against is that the doctor is not going to say that the captain is unfit. They find this out. That the doctor refuses to say it. We find out he's been with the captain for a long time. He doesn't want to declare the captain is unfit.
One of Nelson's own.
Yes. And I think they did a good job of showing that, because all of a sudden, like, the doctor looked did you notice how agitated he looked on screen? He was quite agitated because he realizes that this whole thing is up. And Horatio even makes a comment about how
well, it's indefensible. How can he? I mean, he's in the corner completely incapacitated. He's not lucid. He's not lucid at all. And the Spanish, not the Spanish, the French cannons are coming down on you. You have to do something.
Absolutely. And I just love how it's shown in the episode, very specifically how the doctor is all freaked out. And one of the characters says, make a note that the doctor is inebriated. And it was like, it was so good. I mean, obviously that's what they drink on board anyway, but it also added to this idea of, well, now you're dosing the captain and you yourself are inebriated, and, just like kind of piling up the stuff, which on paper, doesn't really relate to the same situation in person. And they talk about it. They talk about, well, how this is going to look. No one's going to believe us.
And I suspect this is an angle that we'll see revisited in the next episode.
Absolutely. And then, and this is where I think that whoever wrote this episode really did it justice, because suddenly the captain wakes up and decides to call, what is essentially like the port police, the Port Authority police, if you will, for the time, to come on board, because he believes that somebody is trying to do mutiny on the ship, which is a punishable offense. And as the captain, he can do this. He can bring on soldiers, which he does. He brings on, I guess, from the army onto the ship, and they're looking for the mutineers.
Well, and they're Marines. They're Marines, and they're at sea. He's not summoning to the ship.
Oh, I thought he went and got so he didn't go and get the soldiers.
Well, they were sailing the length of the Atlantic. They were going towards. Were they sailing the Atlantic? Yeah, and I'm not sure where the journey begins in this episode, but they were at sea, and they were not, and the men were Marines.
Yes, but they're not part of this crew. So he had to somehow get these soldiers on there to take action and essentially arrest who he believes to be mutineers,
No,
correct?
all the ships had Marines. You know that they were part of the ship.
So they were soldiers on that ship. They were Marines on that
No,
ship.
no, they didn't. Yeah, yeah, they were Marine. They were not soldiers. They were Marines.
Okay. Well, the captain is using them to try and arrest the mutineers on the ship.
Right.
And this is one of the best scenes on the
Oh
ship
yeah.
entirely, because the captain believes that he has the upper hand. He
Hmm.
thinks that this is kind of like a foolproof situation, and normally it would be pretty foolproof. Um, Anytime that something like this happens, where you're calling security to take action against someone and to pretty much put them in leg irons or lock them up or whatever it is, the odds are not on your favor anymore. It doesn't matter how much proof you have. This could turn into a very bad situation, regardless of what injustices may or may not have been done to you. And it's absolutely brilliant how this is handled, Darth Plato, because somehow the captain gets separated. If you remember in the scene, he gets separated from a good portion of those soldiers who are supposed to be looking for these mutineers. And there's an accident. Now, I really like this scene so much because it removes the responsibility of the officers from being responsible for what happened. And I really do like that they did this. It was a matter of circumstance versus, them kind of like taking the blunt end of a bat and knocking him over the head or something, or
Hmm.
trying to, hold up a gun to him. They're actually hiding in the ship. It's such a great scene. What did you think about this part of the story?
Well, it seemed a little silly. It's like, well, how long do they think they're going to hide for? I mean, it's not like they're docked and they can just wait for the opportunity to get to land. I mean, they're on the damn water. It's where they think they're going to go. They can't hide forever. So it did seem a little silly to me, but you're right about the tension. That it definitely is tension. Um, they really didn't have anything to do at that point. I mean, the men are going to find them eventually, and as you said, the accident, the captain walks backwards and falls down. I don't know how far he fell, but yeah, that looked like that was definitely a hard spill. And
Absolutely. Yeah, it looked terrible. That fall on the ship, maybe he fell one deck down, two
so
decks.
yeah, so once the captain was struck down, it automatically goes to the first lieutenant to say, okay, so what do we do, sir? So even though the captain had just been running around like a madman, calling this and that and everybody from here to hell. Uh, it ended there because the captain is now sacked out, and the first lieutenant's making the decisions, and the first the, yeah that was that's how they got that that's how they got that situation.
Yeah, they really did, and it was I mean, they could have gone a number of ways. The most obvious would be where they, tell the captain, "You are unfit to rule," or whatever. They avoided all that, but this was equally crazy, equally chaotic. And my favorite, absolute favorite part was when those officers came, when those I guess they're not officers, but when those soldiers came on and they said, "We're looking for mutineers," and he goes, "Well, did the captain tell you what these mutineers look like?" And I just absolutely thought that was very clever to put in there. Of course, Horatio is not stupid. He's not going to be saying, "Yeah, it's us." I just thought it was amazing, and a lot of fun. Play on situations where, well, did he say who he was looking for? And they're like, "No, we have not been informed of the identity of the mutineers."
Mhm.
Very well. It's kind of, it was so much fun to see this. It's amazing how one minute, things can look very dour, and then the next minute things can look okay, but then it can reverse at any time. So it just was so much fun to watch this play out. Even though pretty much, the guys get arrested after the captain, I guess, rouses himself or whatever the situation is. It doesn't turn out the way that the mutineers hoped it would, and there's nothing anyone could really do about it. Um, And I think that that was also very important because um, even though the officers seemed to have control of what was going on, visually, in actuality, they never had control, did they, Darth Plato?
No, they certainly did not. And the what you see at the beginning of the episode and the end of the episode, where is her or his share located? He's inside a cell. That tells you everything you need to know about that. Um,
Yeah, it really does. So overall, I think that this episode for me, as I said, is maybe my favorite episode of the entire series because
Interesting.
of how these officers had to handle these difficult situations, and it really does go crazy. Now, I didn't talk about it in detail, but you did mention it. How even when they are going close to land, and this situation where I showed the picture of an explosion, they're not even able to respond to that. Oh, hold on. Just talk about that action for 1 second. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Um, well, Horatio was arrested at some point. They didn't show this in the episode, but he was taken to the island of Jamaica that was under British control at the time, and he is visited in a cell by Captain Pellew. Black bloody mutiny, he says. And Pellew doesn't know what's going on, but he trusts Hornblower, so he's trying to reckon.
Sorry.
I was jumping ahead to the conversation with the Hornblower and Pellew.
Thank you so much, Darth Vader. I'm sorry about the interruption. That was the doctor, so I did need to take that call. So I'm glad you're here, Darth Vader. Thank you.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to mention is during the battle scene where they were fighting the fortification up on the hill. I get it would have been the French, and wasn't they must have been like the worst cannoneers ever. Like, they had a long time to shoot a stationary target on the water, and they couldn't get the job done. That doesn't speak very well. That ship would have had a really heavy damage by the time they got out of that situation.
I think
Uh,
I think the soldiers wanted it to be damaged because they had enough. They didn't want the ship to sail another day, and nor did they want to be on this particular boat, which might have been quite typical of boats at the time. But I think that they had enough, and they were not going to go that extra mile to make things work. In fact, someone had said, can you please release the officers so they can command the guys, the cannons on the
mm,
ship? And the captain is like, well, I don't think I can do that. And I thought that that was very interesting, his approach, or at least justification, that even the officers were not worthy during an action to be released in order to give command. But I think that the way they showed it on screen in this episode was absolutely perfect, with the officers kind of underneath, like they were inside the cell and they're like trying to reach out of the grate, trying to see if they can get out. It was absolutely wonderful. What did you think about seeing the officers kind of stuck in there while the boat runs aground?
like I said, it's based on a real event. Something like that really did happen. It may have been the sister ship, because in the case of Hugh Pickett, when they went to Santo Domingo, there was another ship involved. I believe that was the ship that actually that ran aground. I'm not sure what Hugh Pickett had to do with any of that. I know that he was not long for this world after that. But as far as the episode goes, man, well, they had to do something because they had run aground, and that's a terrible situation to be in.
It was. I think that scene, the way that it was shown in this series, was incredibly effective.
Mm.
And the officers, I think, had known things were going kind of crazy for them at this point, and that anything could happen. And I think that they kind of conveyed that in this scene. With one of the officers, it might have been this guy, it may not have been this officer, but one of the officers tells the captain, we can't aim where you want to aim.
Right.
This is going to be some trouble. Even though we have cannons, we can't aim them properly. We all know what that means. You just
Yeah. This is different from how the Navy works now. And nowadays, the way things work is if the CEO gives an order that can't be fulfilled in this case, because the gun literally cannot reach high enough, you're not obligated to obey. The the way duties are now, there is wiggle room for an officer to decline an order. That can happen, but in this day and age, you really can't do that. And I'm not sure how you deal with that. Well, put the guy disagree. Well, it can't. It physically is not possible. What's the captain going to do? Browbeat you? Well, and that's exactly what it is in this case. So it's honestly, I'm surprised that they went as long as they did without taking the captain down.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, just kind of looking at the way it was shown in this series, I think it was wonderful to see the ship break apart, so to speak, or like everything kind of fall apart, and it was very indicative of what was happening on the ship.
Yeah,
The chaos that ensued, it was absolute magic on the screen.
yeah. But what happened in real life was even worse though, because what happened in real life, in the case of Hugh Piggott, was the men turned against the officers. I mean all of the officers, and they were running around the ship like lunatics, and the officers were hiding from the men. So the scene you see in Hornblower is a contrived version of what happened here, except obviously it's they changed it around to favor Horatio and the men that were around him. But in real life, what happened was they found them and they dragged them out of their hiding places and they brought them all onto the deck and they just executed them one by one.
Yeah, and I think you and I both know from the way that this captain was talking about how if someone disobeys him, the punishment is death,
Yeah,
that probably did happen on the ship. And, they spared us seeing things like this, but
yeah. That's bull. What he just said right there.
I'm sorry.
Uh, what he said right there is bull.
But what I
Um,
mean is for a cinematic point of view, because what this is about is we're talking about on screen, it did have a great effect.
Well, sure, but the fact of the matter is that at that time a captain of the Royal Navy didn't have the authority to summarily execute any of his men.
Right, right. But
Um,
for the purpose of this series, which is what we're looking at,
right.
the cinematic quality, it
Sure.
certainly did have, look and sound really official. And seeing, like I said, I think that the soldiers, they're brought up, the sailors are brought up on deck to hear lots of things, but I wondered how seriously they took things. But once you hear that something is punishable by death, they were so drunk anyway. Would they even have heard this stuff? It is very funny. Maybe
Yeah,
it
I
was
know.
more to scare the officers than the soldiers. What do you think?
Well, sure, but it's really just an act of tyranny. Really, what the captain's doing in this case, like my word is law, and if you disobey me, that's death. I mean, it's kind of like when Joffrey in Game of Thrones says, "I am the king." It's the same sort of thing. Really, it's just he just flexing his muscles.
And Tom Jr. Jackson for the $2 super sticker. Thank you so much, Tom Jr. Jackson, moderator and collaborator. We are all goof people. Tom Jr. Jackson, guys, subscribe to Tom Jr. Jackson's channel right here. You can see the link in the description here in the chat as well. So please make sure you guys do that. And also, of course, please subscribe to Positive Fandom here, but also right here, please subscribe to the Burnettwork as well. Guys, on Monday, you can find me with Lorena Creole on the Burnettwork at 6 p.m. for Ladies of the PGS. On Sunday, you can find me on Sunday brunch at 10:30 a.m. in the morning. Tonight at 11, you can find me talking with Julia Mushkin for our Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 5 review. And of course, on Saturday, this Saturday, Lorena Creole and I will be doing our Horror Saturdays review live watch party of the movie Smile.
Yeah, notice,
Darth
notice
Vader,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry,
Notice,
go ahead.
notice the difference in how the officers and the men are interacting here, as opposed to say the Titan when Captain Shaw. Completely different in how they're dealing with things.
It
Of
is
course,
very
of course,
different.
Shaw isn't crazy though. That's the big difference.
I'm starting to love Shaw on that series, and I think they're doing a great job, cinematically there as well. But I do think that this series and this episode was so much fun to watch. The craziness, the zaniness, the going back and forth, Darth Plato. I absolutely enjoyed it so much. Did you enjoy this episode?
Yes, I did, and like I said, just in case anyone missed it, I just wanted to point out that the events of this episode are based on a true story. Something like this really did happen. The offender in question was a man named Hugh Pigot. It's Pigot. So if someone wants to Google it and see for themselves, I think there's a video on YouTube about that deals with it. So it's called the Hermione. I think that's how you pronounce it. Hermione. The HMS Hermione under the Hugh Pigot. Um, I also mentioned one other thing because since you mentioned that you like this kind of drama on a ship, you might be interested in Googling an incident that happened in 1863 on an American ship called the Trent Affair, which was an ugly turn of events where an American warship seized a British civilian ship on the edge of British waters, and well, not to get into a lot of detail about that, but there was a lot of drama there, and there was a certain uh, diplomatic rise and the possibility of going to war, and that was in the middle of the Civil War. So you might find that interesting read.
It is very interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up. It certainly is wonderful to look at these excursions, and thank
It's a very real Crimson Tide sort of situation where you have Captain versus XO, and no, sir, I won't do that. Yes, you will. No, I won't. Yes, you will. No, I won't. Mhm.
I do love that. And I think that this, then I certainly will look into it, Darth Vader. I'm glad you mentioned that. This episode really stood out for me because of all the machinations and everything, all the craziness that went on. They certainly did a great job of really bringing that home to us. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for everything. As always, we are all good people. And guys, please don't forget to subscribe to Tom Jr. Jackson's channel. The link is in the chat. And thank you for the super sticker, Tom Jr. Jackson. It is so kind of you. And Darth Plato, thank you for joining me today. Darth Plato, where can people find you?
Well, first of all, let me offer my own thanks to Tom Jr. Jackson for doing this. I do appreciate moderating the channel as well. As far as where you can find me right here on the It Show with RM, the Positive Family. Um,
Absolutely. And of course,
yeah, I
Darth
run
Plato,
the Twitter roles.
you and I are going to be doing more reviews here on Positive Fandom, and of course on the Burnettwork coming up. We have different things that you and I are working on, so there is more to come down the pike, guys. If you guys are enjoying this program and many more, Darth Plato and I will continue to do this series. And I'm so happy that we can bring this stuff to you guys. Please find me and subscribe to Positive Fandom. Absolutely go ahead and do that if you enjoyed today's discussion. But you can also find me on the Burnettwork on Lorena Creole's channel, as well as the 1/6 Scale Men Network. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Live long and prosper, everybody. Guys, this is my favorite episode of the series. I think that that it really does show such great cinematic accomplishment in making this exciting and not boring. It certainly was a fun mutiny to watch. This was a fun
And
mutiny.
it's only half the episode. The other half is next time.
The redemption, right? Which comes up in the next episode, which I'm also excited to bring you guys next week. Thank you all for watching. And I do want to say for everybody out there, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always do remember to please be kind.
But
Take
first.
care. Bye.